Welcome to Alive to Thrive here on KNSJ 89.1 FM. We're honored today to have our guest Ann Hoiberg here with us. Ann, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mitch, and thank you for KUSI doing this program. As you mentioned, I'm Ann Hoiberg. I'm a retired research psychologist. I worked for the federal government for 25 years, and then I retired and dedicated my life to pursuing whatever was interesting to me. And that involved an endless list of activities, not to mention organizations. And I joined the United Nations Association and also the National Women's Political Caucus. And what I felt was important was that we needed to elect more women to public office. We needed women to just take over. And I also thought it was important to really help to make the United Nations more effective. And one of the areas was refugees and immigration. So I dedicated a little bit of my time back in the early 2000s to really concentrating on refugees.
That's amazing. It's so amazing. I'm so excited to have you on my show. It's amazing. I'd like to give our audience a little bit of history about our friendship. And when I first started, when I was doing the audio engineering, when the pandemic hit, before I was working in the studio, I was co-hosting a music show. I was getting ready to launch this show, but then the pandemic hit and we had to learn how to do everything remotely. But one of the first shows that I did was with you and remotely. And I was doing all the audio engineering, was figuring out all the computer stuff and making sure we were hooked to the live stream and all that stuff. And so, but I remember you were wearing a hat that had a bunch of flowers on it.
Yes.
Day. So I wore a shirt today that has flowers on it for you. No, our friendship goes deep. It goes over the last 3 years, and we've done a lot of different interviews, and I'm honored to have you on my show for the first time. I've always had so much respect for you, and you have such a wealth of knowledge. It's just mind-blowing. Every time I have an interview with you, it's always such a wonderful experience. I would like to know, as you were talking about going through, I know that you focus a lot on refugees, and I'm so excited to get into your book, but as we talk about all the other activities that interested you along the way, would you like to name a few of the other things that you felt like that you were really interested in that you've helped make a difference during your life?
Well, I also joined the League of Women Voters because I thought, along with the mission of the League of Women Voters, the importance of women voting and being knowledgeable about what the different initiatives are. So I became a public speaker for the League of Women Voters, and we would do the pros and cons of each piece of legislation that we felt was important for people to know about. So I did a lot of pros and cons of these initiatives. As you know, the League of Women Voters tries to be pretty, they don't support candidates, but they do take on some issues that are important to all of us. And then some of the other pieces of legislation, we just talk about the pros and cons and leave it up to the voter to decide how to vote. So I became very involved with the League of Women Voters and wrote the history of the League up until about 2011, because we'd been around for many, many years. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt during World War II thought it was important that women get involved in the defense industry. And she said, well, they probably need childcare. So she established federally funded childcare centers, and the first one was here in San Diego.
That's amazing.
And the League of Women Voters was to take on this particular endeavor. Who should benefit from this wonderful federally funded childcare. What a concept. Anyway, so I've been very involved with the League ever since. I'm now part of the committee that's working on immigration and deportation. And that, I think, is a very important issue.
I agree. I agree. How do you feel, not to get too far off topic, but I'm just curious since you brought that up, how do you feel about Title 42 ending and what's happening at the border right now?
Uh, it is such an incredible mess right now.
Oh, just the last 72 hours, like tens of thousands, like it's out of this world. Sorry to go ahead.
What is going on? I mean, all countries are supposed to welcome people who are being persecuted, and they have to leave their countries for some reason. Most people would rather stay where they are. But how do you explain, even in 2021, there were 81.5 million migrants who had left their homes? 81.5 million.
Yeah, it's astounding.
And if they're all coming to different borders, how do the accepting countries deal with that? How do they do the paperwork?
Yeah, just the little things, not to mention the big things like housing and jobs and how do we provide benefits. Our economy is going to sustain all of this new population when all of the benefits and plans that we've set in place have been for our own population. It brings up a whole lot of different questions and a whole lot of different problems that have to be answered.
Yes, how do we deal with the huge number of people who want to cross the border? And do we have personnel to really deal with that? Do we have asylum seeker judges who can hear the cases of people who cannot go back to their countries? It's a horrible situation for all countries to be in, losing many, many exceptional people. And how do we help those exceptional people into our country?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up, and because that's a perfect segment into your book as well, because and we touched on this lightly the last time you were on Talk of the Town, that there are so many incredible women that you interviewed that have so many talents and gifts and abilities that they've brought to San Diego and that they're flourishing and that they're having success. But the real story is where they came from, and like to encapsulate all the suffering and then go into all the beauty that they're experiencing now. I think it makes it even more beautiful, I guess, in a way, because they've come from these terrible situations and they've been able to find success and happiness in San Diego. And that's the beauty of this country. And I'm a firm believer, and I think this country, everyone is welcome to come to this country. And I'm a big believer is like coming in legally, and like I feel like we need to find ways that refugees can come in sustainably. Absolutely, because there are so many people with talents and gifts that they could help benefit our communities in different ways. Could you tell our audience a little bit about your book, and then we can delve into a little bit more about the women that are in the book?
Yes. When I was president of the United Nations Association, I thought it would be important for us to do a photographic exhibit of refugees who had come to our country. Now, this was back in the early 2000s or late 1990s. And we were getting so many people from Somalia. And few of us here in San Diego probably didn't even know where Somalia was. And so I thought it would be important to do a photo exhibit of these women. And I received $500 to do this exhibit. And that was pretty exciting.
That's impressive.
And so we put together this exhibit of refugee women and put it over at the Foundation for Change. And I became really interested in these women. how did they arrive in San Diego? What was the process? And so I really started studying. I looked into what the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is all about. Now, that's the refugee agency that vets refugees coming to different countries. And so the UN would set up these camps, and refugees, if they had to flee their country and go to the neighboring country, they might go to a refugee camp. Many refugees from Iraq would just avoid the refugee camps and go right to Amman, Jordan, and try to work through the offices there, either the International Migrant Organization, ILO, no, not ILO, the IOM. There are so many of these initials, the International Organization of Migration. Anyway, they would go through that organization or through the refugee agency to be vetted, and then to come to whatever country would accept them. So that was the process, and I became very involved in what this process was. And then a lot of people would just show up at our border, and they would be interviewed at the border to determine whether or not they did have credible fear of persecution, and they could not go back to their country. So these particular asylum seekers were another branch of what was coming into the various countries. These people would just show up at the border, or they would come across the border illegally, and then within 12 months, they would have to be before a judge. This was the old ruling back in the early 2000s. They would have to appear before an asylum-seeking judge who would determine whether or not they did have credible fear that they just could not go back to their countries or they would be killed or suffer something. So the judge would have to determine, should they stay or would they have to go back? They would be deported. Well, I became so immersed in this whole process, the process of either being vetted by the United Nations Refugee Agency or being an asylum seeker. Now, here in San Diego, we have an organization called Casa Cornelia, and it's a pro bono organization of attorneys who will take on the cases of asylum seekers and help them prepare to go before a judge to determine whether or not they can stay or be deported.
Well, oh, please go ahead. Sorry, please.
So I did become very involved in that process and what different refugees have to go through.
It's amazing. And I'm so grateful that you explain that in detail, because I'm sure there's so many people out there that don't understand that, including myself. I didn't know those processes, that it has to be a credible fear. Can you describe some of the cases that you heard of where that credible fear was easily acknowledged, or if it was more questioned, or how do you define a credible fear, I guess would be the question.
Well, one of the women in the book, Alima, is from Afghanistan. And back in the 1990s, the Taliban took over Kabul, and her family was so concerned that they moved to another city. And it just so happened the Taliban continued pursuing and taking over cities, and they arrived in that city also. Now, Alima had 16 years of education. She was a journalist. She had a 10-year-old daughter, and she wanted her daughter to go to school. But the Taliban said, no school for girls. So she set up a school at her home.
That's
And
awesome.
Alima had 20 little girls coming over to her house every day. Well, the religious police said, "What's going on with these children coming and going from that house? It must be a school." So they arrested Alima and put her in prison. And she said, "How can you do this? The Quran says that men and women are equal and we all have a right to an education."
Absolutely.
So the Taliban said, "I'm sorry, girls do not go to school." And the family became very concerned. They thought maybe Alima would be killed because she had set up this school. So her father-in-law was a pharmacist. He raised some money. They snuck in some men's clothing into the prison. Alima dressed up as a man, and they paid a little money to the person in charge of the prison, and she walked out as dressed as a man.
That's
And the
amazing.
next day,
It's fantastic.
she and her daughter went to Moscow. Her 10-year-old daughter and she went to Moscow, and there they rigged up passports for her and her daughter, and they flew to Mexico City, and then they flew to Tijuana. And they had a smuggler with her, and they managed to get across the border, and they had one phone number. And they called the phone number, and it was an Afghan-American poet who lived in North County. And he jumped in his car and came down and picked up Alima and her daughter, took the two of them back to his home with his wife and family. And the smuggler went back to Tijuana and back to Moscow. So Alima was here with her daughter. Her daughter was immediately enrolled in school. Until Alima could learn English, she was working as a housekeeper at a Hilton hotel. And now she's back to pursuing her love, which has been journalism. So that's another success story of one of the refugee women in my book. But the fear was so great that she was probably going to be stoned to death for having this school for little girls. And
And
the
that's
family was so terrified that they had to get her out of Afghanistan.
yeah, and that is totally understandable. And I'm so grateful that you shared that story. And I'm sure there are, I believe you said on the previous interview, there's 32 women that you interviewed for your book.
Well, I actually
Okay.
interviewed 42 women.
But 32 felt comfortable with sharing.
Well, 37
37.
agreed to
Okay,
be in
37.
the book, and 5
37.
said, "No, I don't want my story to be told, and it would be just too painful for me to know it was in print."
I can understand that.
Yes.
But it's beautiful to hear that success story. And I would call that legitimate fear. And she had legitimate fear. And I power to her for starting that school because little girls need education. And that
Yes.
just shows the type of woman that she is. And we need women that are strong like that have good values, that want little girls to have an education to be in this country. I think that's fantastic. And so it's amazing to hear her story and that background. How did you get in touch with a lot of these women?
Well, I worked through the 4 resettlement agencies here in San Diego. So we have Catholic Charities, International Rescue Committee, the Alliance for African Assistance, and the Jewish Family Center. And those 4 agencies work with our federal government, the different agencies within our government, to vet people and then to resettle them. So most of the refugees who come to San Diego have been vetted, not only by the United Nations, but also by several agencies in our government. So the State Department checks, I don't know how many agencies. So I worked with those 4 agencies to identify women whom they thought would like to contribute to my book. And I also worked with another agency, Women of East Africa. And so I interviewed a lot of women. I've interviewed 8 women from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And those stories were incredibly unbelievable. Most of the 7 women of the 8 had been in refugee camps for 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
20 years. And they were so happy to be here. One woman said, "My children would never get an education. They're in school now." And she was so excited. I mean, so it's just been a really heart-wrenching experience to hear their stories. Those women out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, oh my gosh, their stories are horrendous.
Yeah. So when they were in those refugee camps for 20 years, are they literally just like staying in tents for 20 years? What does that living look like?
It doesn't look good. How's
I can
that?
imagine. I can imagine it's horrific. Oh, I can only imagine. That's
Yeah, one
terrible.
woman said she'd been in 3 different refugee camps. Now, she came out of Sudan, South Sudan, and she said one was worse than the next one. She said, "I couldn't believe a refugee camp could be horrible, but they were, to her, terrifying." And she tried to escape from one, and the United Nations tracked her down and brought her back.
Really? So they were forced to live in those encampments, even
Well,
though they were fleeing
they
from
just weren't welcome in many cases in the local community.
yes,
And
nowhere else to
fortunately
go.
for her, she ended up here in San Diego.
That's
And
extremely
she
fortunate.
has 5 children, and all 5 are college graduates. Her
Wow.
oldest child is in medical school. I mean, all these stories are amazing. And how these women were so courageous and resilient to go through what they had to go through, and then to make sure their children had the opportunities available here in the United States. It's a
Amazing.
it's a true story of how wonderful the United States is also. I mean, can you imagine one woman from the Democratic Republic of the Congo had 11 children. She
Wow.
and her husband are here in San Diego. They're thrilled that their 11 children are all getting an education. How on earth could they find an apartment for this family?
I know,
11
especially
children?
in San Diego.
Yay. Anyway, they're thriving.
That's amazing. Well, that's the name of this show is Alive to Thrive. And then on that point, I'd like to remind our audience we're interviewing today Ann Hoiberg. She recently wrote a book that we're discussing about refugees here in America. It's called Tears of War. And if you'd like to show our audience the book when you get a chance, but you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM, Descanso, serving the greater San Diego area. And here's Ann's book. Would you like to read the title for me, Ann? And it'll switch screens. There you go. Tears of War. Oh, and this is my dog's head popping up. This is Tinkerbell.
Ah,
She's joining us for the interview. I'm babysitting, but she's my 3-legged puppy. She lost her leg during birth, and so but she doesn't know she's only supposed to have 3 legs, so she runs like she has 4. Uh, she's the happiest little dog. She's just chilling on my lap. But I love the title. I think it's amazing. Do you have more experiences or stories that you would like to share from some of the women of the Congo or some of the experiences? Why were they sent from one camp to another camp? Were there just issues involved, or they wanted something better and they found out they got sent to something worse?
I think it was primarily a choice of the women that they wanted to go to a better a refugee camp, or they wanted a refugee camp that might have an educational program for their children. Not all of the refugee camps offer that. In fact, if you look at the percentages of children in refugee camps who even go to secondary school, it's much lower than what's typical in regular, school systems. So there is a scarcity when it comes to either job opportunities for men to work in a refugee camp, or for children to go to school. I wonder what's flipping on my screen, but it doesn't matter.
Probably just a slow internet glitch, but it'll work itself out. Typically it does. But I think it's so courageous, and I really loved how you expressed that, how courageous these women were, leaving their homes, getting their families safe, had to go through refugee camps, then get sent to another location and get settled. It's all a huge leap of faith. And to be able to settle and have these success stories where their children are getting a proper education is so phenomenal. That's so exciting.
Yes. And what's interesting to me is, I can just give a couple of examples.
Please do.
A family from Syria were concerned. They had 3 daughters who were all approaching the teen years. Now, in Damascus, there was thought that there was going to be a revolution. And this was back in 2011 when we had the Arab Spring. So it was felt in Syria that there would probably be a revolution and a difference in the government, but instead a civil war erupted. Now, what would an affluent family do? The father was a very successful barber, had his own shop, and he has 3 daughters. Now, wouldn't this be scary to have 3 daughters and it looks like a civil war is looming? So they went to Egypt, and they were there for 4 years, and they finally came to the United States. Now, he couldn't speak English. Nobody in the family could speak English, but he was determined to become a barber. So he took ESL classes, and so did his daughters. And they were all 3 daughters were all in school. And he's now a barber. He managed to get his license here in California. The whole family, they're all now US citizens. I mean, it's amazing. And the oldest daughter is just finishing up her AA degree. So wow. It's pretty phenomenal what they've accomplished in just a matter of 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and that's truly inspirational, especially for other people that are in refugee situations that may see this interview, to be inspired and understanding that you can go through the process and find yourself living the life of your dreams and a life where you actually are thriving, if you're willing to do the work. And it's so impressive to hear this story. I'm so glad you brought up this example, because they did the work. They learned the language. They wanted to become US citizens. And I feel like that as you go through the process, I'm seeing that you're taking the steps of learning the language and cutting down those barriers so that you can be more of a member of our society. Those things all help, especially when it comes to owning your own barbershop. It's you have to know how to speak English. But that's so inspiring. That's so inspiring that he was able to do that for his daughters. That really is.
Another interesting story is a woman from Bosnia. Now, Bosnia's war was from 1992 to 1995. And in her particular city, and I've been to that city, they were told that they either had to adhere to what the Serbians were going to do to take over Bosnia, or they better leave. So they left. The family left the next day. and they ended up in Croatia. And the Croatians were not too happy to have all these Bosnians showing up in their country. So some of the Croatians were not very hospitable to these people, especially to Azra and her mother and brother. Her father had gone to Germany. He was working as an engineer in Germany. So they were trying to figure out how to get from Croatia to Germany to be reunited with the father. So they spent 2 years in Croatia. They managed to sneak into Slovenia, and they were there for a little more than a year, and then they made it to Germany. Her father's employer said he would sponsor the family, so they were all reunited in Germany. Azra loved books. She went to the library in Germany all the time. She learned German. She was going to school. She had a job working part-time. And finally, they decided they were going to try to arrive in another country, resettle in another country. And a church in Des Moines, Iowa, decided that they were going to become a welcoming city, Des Moines, Iowa, for refugees. And so they brought a lot of refugees from Bosnia via Germany to Des Moines. And they were so welcoming and so helpful. They made sure the father could learn English so that he could get back to work.
That's so beautiful.
It is a wonderful story. But the father did not like the temperatures in Des Moines, so they moved to Arizona. And Azra ended up here in San Diego, and she's now working at UC San Diego, helping students become acclimated to college life. And she's married now and has she's a 5-year-old daughter, and they just bought a home. Wow.
That's amazing. And I think that there's so many people that worry about overpopulation or worry about how to handle large groups of people coming in this country. In all actuality, there's a lot more land on this planet than people know about. We could actually fit everyone on this planet on Australia, and we'd all have like a quarter acre of land to ourselves. So there's lots of land. And I think there's plenty of space in the United States to bring these people in who are coming from war-torn countries that need asylum. They need somewhere to come, and they have so much to offer. They have all the knowledge and the life experience that they can give. And it's so wonderful to have, like in Des Moines, where they're actually opening their doors and like, we're going to help you. They see the value behind the people that are coming. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it really is.
Do you have any other experiences that you'd like to share off the top of your head, or we can get further into how you came about the book?
Well, in the book, there are quite a few women from Iraq. And at one time, Iraq was unique in that it had the highest percentage of women with a PhD in the Middle East. Iraq was unique in that it had such a high percentage of educated women. Well, 2 of the women from Iraq in the book, and I think there might be 10 women in the book from Iraq. 2 of the women, while they were waiting to be vetted to come to the United States, they finished their master's degree. They did it all online. Both of them were in northern Iraq, and they were able to get their master's degree while waiting to be accepted here in the United States. So talk about determination and resilience. These women are perfect examples of those characteristics, as is true of the other 35 women in the book.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that they I wonder, did you research into, as you were doing your research, did you see which countries were more favorable to women getting educations compared to others, or was it just the areas that the Taliban took over that women weren't allowed to get education?
Well, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is definitely lacking in promoting women. In fact, it's probably the worst place in the world for a woman to try to survive. In fact, The Guardian wrote a fascinating story about the fact that back in 2011, 400,000 women had been raped during that year. Now that's 1,100 women a day
That's
being
horrific.
raped.
That is
So
horrific.
the DRC is not um, a good place for women. And that's true according to the women in the book. But another interesting country was Liberia, which was really created by a group of Quakers back in 1816. The Quakers believed that slavery should end. And then they thought, well, maybe a lot of the freed slaves would like to go back to Africa. So they created Liberia as a place if some of the freed slaves, once slavery was abolished in our country, would like to go back to Africa. Well, one of the women in the book is from Monrovia, and her last name is Harris. So she married a descendant of one of those freed slaves. So
That's
anytime
amazing.
there's an American sounding name from Liberia, he or she is probably a descendant of one of those original 20,000 freed slaves that did go to Liberia. Anyway, this woman, who's now a resident here in San Diego, and she works for Catholic Charities in their educational programs, she is determined to set up more and more schools in Liberia. So before the pandemic hit, she was able to establish one school, and she was collecting money to set up a computer center in that school when the pandemic hit, and that was the end of collecting funds. But she's still determined. She believes that Liberia is in desperate need of schools, so she's pushing to get more schools created.
I would love for you to put me in touch with her because I would love to help assist her in any way. There's a group of different organizations that I can put her in touch with that we could help try and get the funding for that. I would love to support that.
Okay, I will send that information to you, Mitch.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And so, from all of these stories and all that you've shared so far, is there one story that was your favorite or that you felt like touched your heart the most?
Oh boy.
They're all pretty heart wrenching and like heartfelt. So that's a difficult question, I know.
Well, I did tell you about Azra. She's one of my favorite stories because I've been to Bosnia 4 times. The State Department reached out to various organizations and asked if any of our members would want to go to that country during elections to make sure they had fair and free elections. So I did do that 4 times in Bosnia. But that's one of my favorite stories. Another favorite story is a woman who was here, and she was on a speaking tour to talk about her organization in northern Iraq. And it just so happened she was scheduled to go back to Iraq on 9/11. And she was ready to go to the airport when the towers were hit and all airports were closed.
Wow,
So
what are the
she
odds of that?
was stuck here in the US, in New York. And a friend of hers from San Francisco said, well, while you're here, please come to San Francisco and talk about your organization back in northern Iraq. It's called Nawa, which means healing. And she had set up this center to help the residents heal from the wars going on in Iraq. So she went off to San Francisco, and while she was there, she was told, well, back in San Diego, there's an organization called the Kurdish Human Rights Watch, and they would probably welcome you. So she flew somehow with money from her friends in San Francisco to El Cajon, and she settled there, and she worked through Casa Cornelia to show that she could not go back to Iraq under the circumstances. The war was still going on. And so she settled in El Cajon, and she now has her own organization trying to help women who are victims of domestic violence. And she has 3 children. One went back to Iraq, and he's an interpreter there. He probably works for an American contractor. And her other 2 children, one is in the National Guard and just became an officer. And then her other child is working for the district attorney's office as, I can't think of the term, but anyway, she's a victims advocate. And so that's her job. So and the husband is here. He's a retired general with the Kurdish army. So that's another favorite story, but they're all heart-wrenching stories of what they've gone through.
Absolutely. And it's amazing from some of the different stories that you shared and the different stories that I've heard separately, that there's people that come from these situations where they are fleeing a war-torn country. They go through these refugee camps. They see like the darkest sides of humanity in a certain sense. And especially if they're coming from the Dominican Republic and there's all that raping going on, they're coming from like these horrific places, like terrible. Yes. To come over here to have this country and to have the freedom that this country has, that they can do anything they want to do. And I've heard story after story after story about people who choose to go in a direction of their careers of helping other people who have struggled with dealing with abuse or dealing with PTSD or dealing with helping other refugees or helping other people with the process, or there's so many different things that they reach out and help with. But that's just my point, is that when you go through all these trials and people may have the look or the stigma of, well, refugees are leaving these war-torn countries, they have nothing to offer us, which is a lie. These people are highly educated and they are determined to create a successful life in America. And that's what the American dream is all about. And so, but I feel like this sense of awe, well, they can come to America, they can choose any profession, and they're choosing to help other people. You know, it's just a beautiful, I find that beautiful.
Yes, yes, it is. But I think there's one issue that we really need to address.
What's that?
And that is war. How do we stop wars? How do we just create a peaceful climate, a peaceful planet, so that people can remain in their own countries, continue to enjoy the traditions and the customs and the language that they've grown up with? How do we do that?
That is such an important question, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, somehow we have to address that because it's getting scarier and scarier.
It really is. We need world peace. We need world peace. We need to stop fighting over land and all just come together. We're all here on this planet. We all need to work together, and we should be alive to thrive. We're not here merely to survive. We're alive to thrive. We need to all work together. We are all equals. It does not matter the color of our skin. We're all equals. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. We're all the same. Let's treat each other all with the same respect. And it's like the Bible says, you know, do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you. It's a pretty simple rule. But if we just lived by that one rule across the planet, I think it would change things.
I couldn't have said it better. That was perfect. I liked that.
Thank you. I just came up with it off the top of my head, so I'm glad it came out as well. It did. I just felt inspired. What can I say? But truly, I really believe that if we can come together with love, and I think it's a Jimi Hendrix quote when he says, "When the love of power, or when the power of love overcomes the love of power, then we will know peace." Because everyone,
That's superb also.
yeah,
Yes.
because everyone out there in these war countries, they're fighting for power. The Taliban are taking over the cities because they wanted more power. But if their love for power was diminished and the power of love overcame that power, love of power, then the world would know peace. It really would,
Yes.
because we would see the true value of love, and the true joy doesn't come from owning land or having possessions. True love and true joy is experienced in knowing the power of love and what it means, and respecting people's families because you know the sanctity of love within that family. And so I'm a firm believer in world peace, and that's something that maybe we can have some more discussions about in the future.
Well, I'm working on a project with a friend of mine, and we're trying to create an enduring peace treaty.
That sounds amazing. Please tell me more.
And we want all countries to sign on to this, that they will do their utmost to bring peace to their country.
I love
And
it.
now, how do we do that, Mitch? And
That's a
I
great
said,
question.
well, I think we need to identify as many organizations as we can find that are really pushing for peace. All those countries that are peace loving, and, try to unite all of us peaceniks, and try to get everybody, all countries, to sign on to this enduring peace treaty, that no country would ever go to war.
I love that. I'm on board 150,000%. I think it's amazing.
Wonderful.
And you're right. And you're right. That's exactly how you do it. Because in order to build momentum, you need to go to the organizations that already are on your side that are fighting towards peace, and then go to the countries that are already fighting towards peace, have all of them sign it first, then build your momentum. And then you can go to the countries that are more bullheaded and be like, hey, look, we're all fighting for peace over here. And we like you to be at peace too. Come jump on the train, you know? So that's great. I love it.
Mitch, you're our ambassador.
I would love to be your ambassador. Are you serious? That would be amazing. I'll send out the emails. I'll fly to the countries. I'll go anywhere. I'm
Yes, yes. Right now, we're working with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And that organization started in 1915. There were women in Europe. There were 47 women here in the United States that actually got on a ship, and they went to the Netherlands to meet with women from Europe who were against World War I.
wow.
So these women, I can't believe their boat or ship, whatever it was that got those 47 women to the Netherlands, wasn't torpedoed. But anyway, they made it to The Hague, and they met there, and they decided that these women were going to meet with all of the chancellors, all of the kings, all of the presidents of the countries involved in World War I, and they were going to tell them, you must stop this war, this World War I. And so those women did meet with all the presidents, all the kings, chancellors, whatever.
That's courageous. I
Yeah,
love that.
Jane Addams met with President Woodrow Wilson, and this was before the U.S. became involved in World War I. And she said, no, the United States should not go into World War I. Well, he was convinced that we needed to be there. Anyway, so WILPF, WILPFF, whatever, is still involved in this peace movement. And so we're here in San Diego. We do have a small WILF organization, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And we're trying to create this enduring peace treaty. And WILF is helping us create this. And now that you're an ambassador for this endeavor, we're on the way. We're on our way.
That's so exciting. I've never been an ambassador before, so this is going to be, I'm looking forward to it. But if there's anything that I can do to help bring peace to the world, that's like fulfilling a dream for me. So I will help any way I can.
Wonderful.
That's super exciting.
Yes. So that's where a lot of the refugee women will be involved also, because they're all peace-loving individuals also.
That's amazing that they can come from such war-torn countries. And I mean, I guess also it makes sense that they're so peace-driven because they've come from those instances, you know. But I also could see some people having some bitterness, but it's good that the majority of the people want to create something positive from the things that they've endured. But I love the concept of having enduring peace and getting everyone on board, especially with the world of the directions going and the world markets are going, and that with a lot of India and some of those European Eastern nations going more towards cryptocurrency now and less on the US dollar, I feel like there's a divide coming. So to hear you say that we're going to work on reuniting everyone before that, I think that's brilliant. And that's the best thing that we could do.
Yes.
Bring everyone together before it falls apart.
Yes. Couldn't agree more.
Well, we have about 8 minutes left of the show. Would you like to tell us more about some of your life experiences and the things that brought you to where you're at, or some of your future goals of things you'd like to work on? What would you like to discuss?
Well, I could mention, I did mention that I've been to Bosnia 4 times. When I was president of the United Nations Association, I did receive a phone call from the U.S. Department of State, and they were looking for people who would volunteer to go to emerging countries and help them with their elections. So I turned to the membership of the United Nations Association here and asked people if they would like to become an election supervisor in these emerging countries. We would just be there to observe and to help people vote. So I signed up, and my first assignment was actually to set up a voter registration center in Donji Vakuf in Bosnia. And so I was there for 2.5 months registering people to vote. Now, Bosnia, and this was in 1997, had been out of that war since 1995. And I could not believe the pervasive sadness in that country. It was as though the people there felt that they had been betrayed. They had been betrayed by being brought into this war. And so that was an eye-opener for me to see how sad this war had impacted people. And I'm not sure Bosnia has really recovered. In fact, I just looked up what their current rate of unemployment is, and it's almost 16% unemployed people. Now, they've been out of war since 1995, but the recovery doesn't seem to have really taken hold. And then I thought, well, is this the outcome of most wars? Now, if we look at Somalia, oh my gosh, talk about a country that's really suffering. And if we look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that's another country that's been in civil war and militias everywhere. So how do we help?
Seem to have a minor glitch here. Sorry, you guys. I'll just remind our audience you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM here on the social justice station. We serve the Descanso area and the greater San Diego area. I'm your host, Mitchell Murphy. You're currently listening to Alive to Thrive here on KNSJ. Our guest today is Ann Hoiberg, and we've been discussing her book, Tears of War, and about
Recover.
Oh, we lost you there for a second, so I just gave the ID. Go ahead and continue, please.
Oh, I don't know what was heard and what wasn't, but I was talking about countries that come out of war.
We lost you right when you were talking about the women in the Congo, and as you were discussing that, the situation in the Congo.
Yes.
The Dominican Republic.
Yes. I remember when Hillary Rodham Clinton was our Secretary of State, and she went to the DRC, and she was appalled at the situation there for women. And so she actually managed to get a UN plane to take her into Eastern DRC so she could see for herself how horrible the situation was there. And she even offered the president to give him a few $1,000,000 so that he could start to clean up his country. And of course, since then, it just hasn't been that improved at all. And so we really need to help these countries that finally do have a peace treaty in place to really help them engage in making peace. What's going to happen in Iraq? What's going to happen in Afghanistan? We left those countries. But what more help do they need? And how do we deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan? So it's a major endeavor. It's horrible going to war, but the after effect is something that's another major issue. How do we help these countries recover and become productive?
Absolutely. I completely agree. And it's really hard when you have so many countries that do have a peace treaty with us that are still struggling so much. And have you ever seen the mines that they have in Africa that they're harvesting for the electric cars, for the tungsten, I believe it is?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, the mining operations that they're doing for the production of the lithium batteries, it's very rare to find a mine, but the mines that they have in Africa, it's human trafficking, but it's more human trafficking labor. And these people are living in the worst conditions and just working 24 hours a day, sleeping, working 24 hours a day. It's with that working all the other time that they're not sleeping, I mean. And I watched a video on it yesterday, and it's appalling. I've been researching into it recently and trying to figure out what I can do to try to help. But it's sad when you see people in these other countries that are struggling, and we're so blessed here in this country. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show, and so we could hear some of the inspirational sides of what can happen when people come to this country and they do the work, they learn the language, and they get involved, they go to school, and they thrive. And that's why I love America. God bless America, because it's the land of opportunity, and that's why people want to come here. And I'm grateful to hear about other people that are American citizens that are welcoming people. I thought that was very touching as well. Well, yes. We're about out of time. Do you have any finishing thoughts, or would you like to show your book one more time and tell our audience how they can find it?
It is listed on Amazon, or I was just going to say you could contact me and get a book from me also. And how could we do that, Mitch?
If you want to text me the information, I'll share it in the show's details, and then it will be in the description of the show.
Okay, that would be great. So I'll send you my email address, and you can contact me, and I'll personally deliver a book to you, or you can order it on Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I love our interviews. They always are so great, and I always learn something, and it's always a lovely experience. So thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any other finishing thoughts before we wrap up the show?
Well, I just love the name of your show. Yes, we all need to thrive.
That's right. That's right. We all do. We all need to be alive to thrive. I absolutely agree.
Yes.
Well, let's have you on again soon here in the next few months, and I'm sure there'll be something else new in your life we'll discuss. You're always doing something, so I'll have to bring you back
Okay.
on, but I'll be in touch though. Okay.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you.
And thank you for all the work you've done all across the whole course of your life. You were such an inspiration to me and such an inspiration to so many other people. Thank you, Anne, for everything that you've done for humanity. You truly are a saint, and it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining in to KNSJ 89.1 FM here on Alive to Thrive. We will see you all next week.